There's this old story of a certain natural disaster coming and basically taking out the whole world, and the only way that anyone survived was this crazy guy built a big boat. Floods. It's kind of ironic that over 50% of the human body is made of water, but it turns out you can have too much of a good thing.
My name is Laura Zara.
The most important thing is not dying.
I'm a survival and backcountry specialist.
I'm getting caught on every tree branch. Whew. I love antlers.
I have a hard time explaining what I do and what my life looks like.
But it's way easier to just show you.
Sometimes you end up in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you can't always predict where the bears are gonna be. Learn what it takes to become decivilized.
There's a lot of different reasons floods happen, and there's a few different kinds depending on how you want to break it down, but I'm going to break it down into two because there is a lot of information. The first is coastal flooding, like flooding from a storm surge, and then the after effects of all of that standing water from the flood, but I'm going to talk about all that in an upcoming episode. Today, I want to focus on swift water floods, so floods from a torrential downpour and swollen, raging rivers. I love water, but I will never underestimate its power. I remember years ago, I was driving on the streets of Vermont with a friend, and there was this crazy downpour. The ground had already reached its peak saturation point, and the next thing I knew, there was just a wall of water coming right down the road. Luckily, he made a quick decision, and there was a steep driveway on our right, and he pulled right up there, and the wall of water came past us, no harm done. I just remember these huge sheets of asphalt that were being lifted up by those flood waters, and these massive limbs that were floating down the street. I never even thought about the possibility of a flood happening in that area, and I'm so glad that I wasn't the one who had to make that decision. No matter how incredible something is, you can't get caught up in just watching it. Even though I've always felt like I had a survival instinct, it was so out of the ordinary. I was just caught up in this sense of awe. I learned then that as unlikely as you think something is to happen, it can happen in an instant. And you not only need to think about what your reaction would be, but you need to make that game plan ahead of time. Nowadays, a lot of people want to get videos of what's happening, but no matter what, it is not worth getting that front row seat if it's going to cost you your life. Things can change really quickly, and what could be a good view at one moment, it can be a death sentence in the next. If you live in an area and a flood warning's issued, take it seriously. The worst case scenario is if you evacuate and the flood doesn't come, you are slightly inconvenienced. The worst case scenario, if the flood does come and you didn't evacuate, is death. So I know what I'm gonna choose.
The big misconception about floods is you only need to worry about them if you live somewhere perched right above the water where floods happen all the time.
But the reason that historic floods make history is because they don't follow any rules.
Flash floods can happen while it's still raining, but they can also happen when it's not raining at all where you are. If torrential rains happen in an area that has a higher elevation to where you are, you might not even know about all that water that's coming your way. You hear about this happening along the desert where the ground can't accommodate all the water, and slot canyons in particular can act as death traps when all that water comes raging through. If you are wearing a pack, take it off so that it doesn't pull you under.
It's important to not only look at the weather where you're gonna be, but also the weather surrounding where you're gonna be. It's pretty surprising how little water it can take to sweep you off your feet if you are caught in a flood. A lot of this depends on the speed and force of the water, the depth of the water, and how slick the surface is that you're standing on, but it can take as little as 6 inches of water to knock you down. If you do end up in the water, being a good swimmer is not enough to get you out of that. Floodwaters are full of all sorts of debris that's not usually in the water, such as yourself, and that debris can hit you with the force propelled by all that water behind it. Hitting your head and getting knocked out, obviously not ideal in this situation. You also have to worry about the objects that are stationary, like trees and rocks, that water can force you into as the moving projectile. You can get sucked under these objects, or your feet can get trapped. So if you do find yourself caught in these floodwaters, try to keep your feet up as much as possible and conserve your energy as much as you can, because you're gonna need to save that energy if you get an opportunity to swim to safety. You also need to be worried about strainers. And this happens when an object like a tree or a fence is in that water and it traps large objects, but the force of all that water can still move through it. And if you end up pressed up against one of these strainers, the force of the water pushes you against that object, and it's so powerful that you can't just swim out of it. It's probably one of the biggest nightmares about being caught in floodwater. Log jams are a common kind of strainer. Log jams usually form because the main current of the water is pushing all the objects in the water into the same place and they get trapped. And unfortunately, you are also an object that is going to get pushed into that same place. These strainers can be underwater, they can be really tough to see, but sometimes debris gets caught on them and you can kind of see it trapped there. If you do see a strainer, this is the time to swim with everything you have to try to get out of where the current is trying to push you into it. Sometimes it's not possible, and this is your worst case scenario. If you find yourself in that situation, you're actually going to swim directly at the strainer with as much speed as you possibly can and try to propel yourself up and over by giving a massive kick as you're pushing yourself up. The idea is to hopefully vault over this obstacle in the water so that you'll be on the downstream side of it. If you are close to shore, or if there is an area of calm and all the chaos, this is also when you want to give everything you have and just try to swim for safety. If you are out driving and you see a flash flood, do whatever it takes to get to higher ground, even if it means leaving your car behind and going up on foot.
If you come to a place where water is actively running across the road, it is not worth it to try to cross that water, no matter how badass your vehicle is. Even if you've driven that road 100 times and you've driven it with a little bit of water in it, that depth can be really deceiving.
Sometimes the rushing water will wash out the ground underneath, so the surface, it appears the same level, but you never know what's happening under that water.
Even if you knew the exact depth of that water, it does not take as much water as most people think to carry your car away.
It only takes a foot of water to carry away most cars, and almost any vehicle will be carried away in 2 feet of moving water. So while what it takes for your rig to be washed away in that situation is a combination of the speed of the water and the depth of the water, you're probably not going to be doing math if you find yourself in that situation. Even if there's a bridge over the troubled waters, bridges can be washed away very quickly and without warning, so it might not be worth it. I'm a visual learner, but I love my truck too much to show y'all, sorry, so I borrowed a friend's. If you do happen to be in a vehicle caught in a flash flood, make sure that you and anyone that's with you unbuckles their seatbelt. Oftentimes the water is going to prevent you from being able to open the car door, so make sure that you open your window so that you can have an escape route in case the electrical system fails. If it won't open, then use a pointy object to break it open. Now, what to do next can be really confusing. Some sources will tell you to stay in your vehicle, some will tell you to climb onto the roof of your car,
and some will say to get away from it as fast as you can and swim out into the water. But in all reality, it depends on the circumstances of that situation.
I want to stay out of those floodwaters as long as possible, but I'd have my window open and ready to bail, because remember, things can change at any moment and there might be a bunch more water coming. If the water is deep enough to be submerging the vehicle, or the force of the water is pushing it into the car and filling it up, but the vehicle's wedged really tightly and not moving, I would get out of the vehicle and climb on the roof. It's keeping you out of those floodwaters, and if anyone is around, they can see you easier on top of your car than in the rapids. I'd probably try to pull the seat belts out of the car on the upstream side and have something to hold on to if I don't have a roof rack, because in all reality, it's gonna be really hard to hold on to the top of a wet vehicle with moving water. If I get washed off, I want to be prepared to be in that water. That vehicle, if it is moving, can start to roll and spin and can pull you down or trap you up against something else. So if you are in the water, get away from it as quickly as you can if it's moving. If you see someone else who's trapped in floodwaters, The first thing you need to do is make sure that you're not putting yourself in danger trying to help them. If you can't guarantee your safety, then you're probably just gonna end up creating another person that needs to be rescued. If you can't safely help the person in the water, then alert first responders as soon as possible and do your best to keep your eyes on the person that's in the water and keep track of where they are. Would have never happened if it was a Chevy. If you happen to be a paddler and you just happen to travel around with some sort of throw bag, which is essentially a rope inside a bag that you can throw at someone, awesome, you can try to use that, get the person tied off, try to pull them to safety. Hey, if you happen to travel around with random life vests, you can try throwing them a life vest. It's important to remember that if they are caught in really swift moving water, that roar of the water around them is probably gonna prevent them from hearing you when you're trying to talk to them. If you have a whistle, that could help. If you're interested, I would highly recommend taking a swift water rescue training. Not only are you gonna learn about the hydrology and how to read the water, but you're also gonna learn how to stay safe if you're the one in the water and how to help someone else if they're in there. Not only is there classroom time, but you actually get to practice these scenarios in a really controlled setting that's much safer and much more preferable than trying to learn firsthand when you need it. One last thing I can give you to worry about is hypothermia, because if you're in the water for an extended period of time, then that's a real concern. So feel free to go and watch my hypothermia episode to learn more about that. Like basically any natural disaster, avoiding being caught in the worst case scenario is your best bet. By paying attention to the weather and listening to any warnings and making educated decisions, you hopefully will be able to avoid even having to use any of these skills. Or just build a giant boat and load it up with 2 of every animal. That sounds like my kind of party anyway. Flash flood. Log jams are not a delicious spread. I can't even read. Jesus. You doing again? You're probably not gonna be doing math if you find yourself in that. Getting high on this thermocell.